Hey, I'm golf broadcaster Matt Adams. The updated and expanded second edition of my book, The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, Golf's Biggest Stars Recall Their Finest Moments, is now available. Readers can expect to march with Arnie's Army at the 1960 U.S. Open, relive Jack Nicklaus's remarkable 1986 Masters win, and be amazed by the Tiger Slam. The Golf Round I'll Never Forget, Golf's Biggest Stars Recall Their Finest Moments. Pick it up where fine books are sold, including BarnesandNoble.com and Amazon.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hi folks, welcome again to another episode of Pro Football in the 1970s. I'm your host Joe Zagorski, and in this episode we'll be talking about replacing a legendary head coach in the 1970s. Now, in one of my recent posts on my Facebook page, The NFL in the 1970s, I questioned everyone who followed that page about the prospect of replacing a legendary head coach. It only happened a few times during the decade of the 1970s with mixed results, but it started in grand fashion right at the beginning of the decade. In 1970, Don Shula left Baltimore for the sunny climates of South Florida. His efforts would soon turn the Miami Dolphins into a dynasty. But who replaced Shula in Baltimore? That would be Don McCafferty, and he was beginning his rookie season as an NFL head coach. Yes, McCafferty had a bunch of experienced veteran players on his roster, but he also had some pretty productive younger players at the skill positions on offense. As the year wore on, the Colts went on a 6-game winning streak, and they somehow made it into the playoffs. It was during the postseason that McCafferty and his players really hit their stride. They shut out Cincinnati in the AFC divisional playoffs 17-0. Then they defeated the always tough Oakland Raiders in the 1970 AFC Championship game 27-17. Finally, in Super Bowl V, Baltimore came from behind to beat Dallas in the final seconds 16-13. Thus, Don McCafferty became the first rookie head coach in NFL history to win a Super Bowl. Sounds like an answer to a trivia question, actually. Well, McCafferty's rookie experience at winning a Super Bowl was the exception and not the norm. Replacing a legendary head coach often was not too successful. Take the story of Paul Wiggin. Hank Stram had been the head coach of the Kansas City Chiefs in each of their first 15 seasons of existence from 1960 to 1974. He had led the Chiefs to 3 AFL championships and to a victory in Super Bowl IV in 1969. But following a 5-9 season in 1974, Kansas City decided to make a change in 1975. In stepped Paul Wiggin, a former defensive end for the Cleveland Browns during the 1960s. Wiggin was not as successful as his predecessor in Kansas City, however. He was fired after his Chiefs team won just 11 of their first 35 games under his leadership. A 44-7 loss at Cleveland in the 7th week of the 1977 season was all that Chiefs owner Lamar Hunt needed to see. Assistant coach Tom Bettis took over for Wiggin in Week 8 of the 1977 season. Now, Wiggin's plight in Kansas City showed just how difficult it was, and still is, to replace a coaching legend. Near the end of the decade of the 1970s, another man tried his luck at replacing a legend. Chuck Knox of the Los Angeles Rams won 5 consecutive NFC Western Division titles from 1973 to 1977, but Knox was never able to get the Rams to the Super Bowl. His replacement, Ray Malavasi, almost did in 1978, when he was a rookie head coach, and when Los Angeles made it all the way to the NFC Championship game. The following year, however, Malavasi was able to guide his Rams to Super Bowl XIV. The team's ownership had enough patience with him, and in 2 years, he brought them more success than the post-merger Los Angeles team had ever seen before. Now, one team made an incorrect choice when they replaced a legendary head coach in 1976, and they only had that legendary leader to blame for it. Paul Brown was the owner and the head coach of the Cincinnati Bengals, and he retired at the end of the 1975 season. He decided to promote Bill Tiger Johnson to be Cincinnati's new head coach instead of selecting his most gifted offensive assistant, future Hall of Famer Bill Walsh. The choice was one of the worst of Brown's life. Johnson's teams produced winning records in 1976 and 1977, but in 1978, Cincinnati began the year winless in their first 5 games, and Brown decided to pull the plug on Johnson. Bill Walsh, in contrast, went on to become the head coach of the San Francisco 49ers in 1979. 2 years after that, Walsh and his 49ers were putting a Vince Lombardi trophy in San Francisco's trophy case. It's the same old story in practically any form of business. Pick a right person to replace a legend, and you had best pick the right person. Now, for a trivia question for this episode, who coached the Cincinnati Bengals immediately after Paul Brown fired Bill Tiger Johnson? That concludes today's episode of Pro Football in the 1970s. Before I sign off, though, I wanted to mention that Sports History Network has a variety of great sports-related and sports history-related podcasts that you should listen to if you have a chance to check in, because it's a great opportunity to learn not just about football, but about practically every sport known to man. Again, I'm your host, Joe Zagorski, and I look forward to chatting with you again on the Sports History Network. Take care.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, a.k.a. the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website, seriously, all you got to do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you got to do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.